Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I'm more than happy to be here. It's my honor to present special thanks to Professor Weiner and other members of this faculty to organize this event. So from the very beginning, let me first introduce our topic, because the main goal is to analyze the problem on the border between Poland, Belarus and Ukraine. So I decided to divide this presentation into two parts. So first one will be about Ukraine, border with Ukraine, and second about Belarus. So mainly I was trying to conduct this research in this year among the members of the Ukrainian diaspora, also Belarusian. We have a strong community in Poland from these countries, and also with the representative of the government from Poland and Ukraine. But with Belarusian, of course, it was impossible to conduct this research. So this is the outcome of this research that I would like you to present. First of all, I would like to introduce you with this topic and give you a background of the problem. So let's start to go a bit earlier to see how the border was established. So we start, historically speaking, the border between was established in 1945, and Poland lost territories on the east and have resided on the west. But still, this border belts still remain, let's say, not too much touched, because they were settled by the different ethnicities. So, for example, they were settled as before it was region on the border, settled mainly also by the people, by the Jewish people, because especially in the eastern part of Poland, a lot of Jewish people used to live. And but fortunately, majority of them were killed during the Second War. However, other groups still live in this region, and maybe related with Ukrainians. So, I mean, the majority of the people who lived over there were Ukrainians, but we have also some kind of so-called subgroups of Ukrainians. Among them were Wenkos, and moreover we have Boykos people, and just in the corner, as you see on the blue color, and finally we have Hutsurs, so-called Hutsuli, and locals. And this is what is unique among this group that were settled on the Polish side, close to the border. They didn't know who they are, actually. The identity was pretty complex. For example, the locals, people from this region, used to speak three languages: Ukrainian, Belarusian, and also Polish. And they called themselves in the census, like during this investigation, when they come over to this region, the specialists asked them who you are. They said, we are from here, we are locals. And also very interesting aspect is of their beliefs, because they mix nature with Christianity. They were like Indians a bit, yeah. So it's kind of phenomenon in our history to have these groups. But if you want to learn a bit more about their beliefs, I recommend you to read Mickiewicz. Mickiewicz is one famous writer, and moreover, Sapkowski is like, I don't know if you are familiar with his movies on Netflix, so he's also used to write a lot of this kind of stories referring to the tradition of the Slavic people from this area. So finally, 1947, the communists decide to create a new Poland. And mainly so decide in 1947 to resettle the people from this region, and mainly Ukrainian people and also other groups such as Boykos and Wenkos, and to move them, to split them in western part of the Poland. So it was in 1947 the process began, and actually they had received the worst conditions, because it was 1947, 2 years after the war. So they were find themselves in pretty hard conditions. That's why many of them want to come back. However, the goal of the authorities was mainly to keep them, to split them around the country, and to create a new Polish identity, and no to give them also the goal of the authorities were of this operation was also to because they are thinking that maybe in future the Ukrainian people and other groups will support national Ukrainian army, UPA, so they were afraid that maybe that's why they decided to split them and move to other part of the Poland. And also maybe the reason was the process of homogenization of the country to create them one identity without any groups. So that was the consequences of this policy, and also eliminated people as a threat for the national security. So that was the first attempt to let's say enforce the border, and the second process in place. The goal of the communists were to enforce the border. So they began the process of militarization of the border between Poland and Belarus and Ukraine and Poland. And actually, there were several reasons why they decided to implement this policy. First of all, they perceive Poland as a buffer zone. So in the case of conflict between NATO and Soviet Union, Poland will be the battlefield. So the access of Polish people to travel, for example, to Ukraine, even though we used to be with the same bloc, was limited. So you need to apply for special documents to go. So it was two different worlds actually. So very hard to get from Poland to Ukraine and to Belarus. You need to apply, and it will take a long time to receive the permission to travel to this region. So there was the first attempt to. So the reason why the Soviet began this process to enforce a militarization of the border. And this is also important to bear in mind about this, that Poland was considered by the Soviets as the Westerns. So they're afraid that maybe the Polish people in future, due to the fact that Polish people used to be very strong Catholics, religious affiliation was very strong. So they're afraid that maybe the Polish people will inspire Ukrainians and Belarusians for kind of more freedom. And so there's a big gap between Poland and the Soviet Union in this region. We didn't have such a process of Russification compared to other regions such as Belarus and Ukraine. And that's why they consider Poland as a merriest barrack in the socialist camp. So, for example, Poland was allowed to make jokes about Soviets, but in Ukraine, in the time Belarus, you will finish in prison. So always Poland used to be more considered as a free barrack, and maybe not in terms of the economy, because, for example, Czechoslovakia in that time used to have access to many products from the Western. So we can buy, for example, my first banana was in Czechoslovakia, because in Poland it was hard to get. However, access to the freedom was much more higher compared to Hungary after 1956 and Czechoslovakia after 1968. So Poland was considered as a threat for the security in the Soviet bloc. In the Ukraine or in Belarus under control of the Soviet Union. So there was a big gap between these two wars, and also there's an aspect about because it was a state of untrust. So no one trusts anyone in that situation. So for example, when some professor decided to travel to Moscow, Polish government also decided to give them kind of protection and send agents from Poland. And the Polish agents started to complain during the visit in Moscow that are followed by the Soviet agents. So there was lack of the trust between the state institution. We always have some doubts, maybe Polish secret service, even they were communists, will be trying to find some information about Soviets. So there was two different stories. And also many Russians, when they start to visit Poland, according to some estimates, were surprised about the freedom. For example, in the 80s, before collapse of the Soviet Union, when some of the professors decided to visit Poland, they were shocked to see the Brazilian soap operas in Polish TV. In that time, Polish roads were empty due to the fact that it was very popular, but Russians didn't have such an opportunity to see the private cars, because Poland was, in that time, still people have access to this kind of goods, not like in Ukraine or in Moscow. So that was the main factor why essentially they began the process of monetization of the border, and it led them to go forward. And this situation actually didn't change too much. In the 90s, there was some liberalization in the regime of visa requirements. However, in 2017, finally, the European Union decided to began the process of liberalization of the visa regime, and they let Ukrainian people to go without visa. And main reason why they want to travel to Poland without visa, liberalization of this policy was conducted by the European Union, and main reason why, because the European Union want to encourage Ukrainian people to implement some democratic reforms, to fight with the corruption, to let people to improve some of the economy. So you will implement some reforms and we will let you to travel to Poland. And finally, there was the first wave of migration from Ukraine and from Ukraine to Poland, and suddenly number of the Ukrainian people started to rise. Especially, we can see this process at the universities in Poland, because they were, even Polish universities were trying to find as much as possible students from Ukraine to live in Poland, and also Ukrainian people were trying to find a job. And especially there's a big gap in salary between Ukraine and Poland, so there was a great opportunity for them to move to Poland and to study and work at the same time. So there was the first wave of migration, and finally the most crucial moment took place when the aggression of Russia began. So in that time, I have to admit, Poland was one of the key country that decided to host so many people, but I also believe that Poland, without Polish government, without the support of the regular people, will not be able to help Ukrainian people to settle in the countries. We didn't have any refugee camps because actually all people around Poland started to help the Ukrainian people, and even if you will follow at the time the social media on Facebook, so there were competitions among the Polish people who will help more, who will offer housing, etc. for Ukrainian people. So I think that was a really honeymoon period in the relation between Poland and Ukraine, and I never have seen actually such a solidarity among the Polish people and good feelings, because it was like really passed the exam during this crisis. But also the countries trying to support Ukraine, of course, and Romania was one of the countries that decided to host. And you can even imagine, like during the 2 weeks, more than 1 million people appeared. So what kind of efforts do your country have to approach to sort out this problem with such a high number of the people? So I think there was tremendous good in our relation from the beginning. Let me go forward. So in terms of the location, so majority of Ukrainian people decide to find a good job. So they find the places where actually there's very low unemployment. Since Poland is facing the problem of demography and unemployment is very low, so they were really welcome in the Polish factories, and they set up mainly in the Warsaw. So Warsaw, if you now will go to Warsaw, the capital, you will see a lot of Ukrainian people who are working and studying at the same time. So they have a lot of Poland, and there was a win-win policy in the time they have a job, and also Poland was able to sort out some of the demographic problems. So there was a crucial time in our relation. And however, the problem began when Russia began to block the Black Sea ports. So for Ukrainian, it is the crucial to have access and to export their goods, especially grain, via Black Sea. Without Black Sea, it was extremely hard before Ukraine export more than 90% their grains via the Black Sea, and Russia decided to block these ports, and as a result of this, Ukraine needs to find other alternative. And we also should bear in mind that more than 40, like almost 50% of the export is outcome of the export from in Ukraine is grain. So without grain, it will be very hard in Ukraine to survive. So they were trying to find meanwhile some alternative way to sort out the problem of logistics, and they offered the alternative way via Poland and other members of other countries in Central Europe and Slovakia, Hungary. And the problem began just because if you follow these problems, due to the fact that some of the people during the process of the transportation of these goods were trying to earn. They were trying to take advantage of this situation. So the Polish companies were trying to, there was opportunity to earn good money. Yes, they were trying to buy a grain directly during the process of transportation, and due to the fact also that there was more grains and the price started to go down, the farmers started to go on the streets and they started to protest and block the roads. And the crisis in relation between the honeymoon finished, and it led to the crisis in relation on the political level and also affect the public opinion. So in order to understand also the system of the agriculture in Poland and Ukraine, I prepared this chart, and according to this information we can learn that essentially there's a big gap between the agriculture in Ukraine and in Poland. Because in Ukraine, majority of the grain production is in the hand of so-called agro-oligarchs. They used to work before in this state farms, and like Lukashenko is one of the examples of this person, but in Belarus. And due to the fact they didn't have private property, private farms, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, some people started to take advantage of this situation and started to buy the farms from the poor farmers, and finally they control more than 50% of the lands in Ukraine, and they are the key factors. And they have, as you see, more than the, let's say, average of this lands, like between 10,000 to 600,000 hectares. Meanwhile, in Poland, we have a small farms only in the hands of the, let's say, 11 or 12 hectares. So that's very tiny, very small. And because of that, they are very strong as well in the politics. So the only, to be honest, like because of the number of the farmers and the diversity as well, because they are producing different products, not like Ukraine, mainly corn, sunflowers, and other grains. However, Poland is more diverse in this case, but they are also very strong in terms of the organization. So the Polish government always separated two groups: miners and farmers, because they are very easy to organize, they can block the streets, and that's why they have to be very careful with these two groups. So as a result of this policy, we have a crisis between in relation. However, Ukrainians also accuse Poland for this policy to block export of because it was crucial to survive for Ukraine as well. So they were trying to finally to calm down with emotion and to find some solution to sort out this issue. And finally, it forced Ukraine to find some alternative way. For example, to find not only shipping these goods via Polish territory, but also by rivers, and also Turkey was playing a key role in the process as well, and had them to export these goods via the Black Sea. So they were forced to find the alternative way, and finally the problem was at least frozen in this case. So that was the main. But what are the consequences? Mainly the result of this policy. Unfortunately, it affects the public opinion, not only the political level, I mean, between the governments, give a bad picture of this collaboration, but sympathy toward the Ukrainians fall down. From the very beginning, Polish people used to be very enthusiastic, more than 90% support Ukrainians to settle in Poland, and after years, it started to fall down. So according to estimates, it's like nowadays more than less than 60% people supporting accepting refugees from Ukraine. But this is not only the result of this grain crisis, but also the other aspect as well. I face actually very similar situation in Turkey, because Turkey was hosting also the policy of open gates, and now they want to all the refugees from Syria to move back to their country. So we see the same process in Poland actually, because the Polish people were hoping that finally Ukraine will win the war in the short term, but it became quite opposite. So that's why the support not only for refugees but also for European integration of the European Union of Ukraine to the European is falling down. Because they are afraid that in future Ukraine might be, first of all, competition. They have such a good soil, and they will sell a lot of cheap grains, and finally it will affect the pocket of the Polish farmers. And also they are afraid that this money that we are also supporting to Ukraine, finally so rich people will reside because of the corruption. So that's why this kind of support is a bit going down. So the next story is based on the border between Poland and Belarus. So in this case, actually, we face a different situation because, as you see, the peak moment in relation between, the problem began in 2021. So Belarus essentially started to offer some kind of touristic offer to the people who from the Middle East, the touristic package from in Turkey, and essentially they were trying to bring people from Iraq, from Syria, and to push them later first to move them to the Minsk, and later to push them forward to the Polish border. And there was a big moment when in 2021 there was the highest number of the people who were trying to cross the Polish and Belarusian border. Later it fell down, and many, because Turkey was playing in that time a key role in this process. In the past, Turkey is already hosting almost 4 million people from Syria, and their capacity is limited. However, they were trying to, in that case, to put pressure on the European Union to share the problems of refugees. But at that time, a lot of refugees were trying to travel from Turkey directly to Belarus, and Polish government decided to take some action, and also European Commission, and as a result of this, finally the Turkish government blocked this way to travel from Turkey to Belarus. That's why the process was limited. Plus, the Polish government decided to build a wall ad hoc, and it took 1 year to enforce this structure. And what are the main? What is the main goal of Russia and Belarus in this process? What Russia want to achieve in Belarus by pushing the people from the Middle East to the Polish soil? First of all, Lukashenko is hoping to find some weaknesses in the European Union to also to create a bad image of also for interior affairs. He wants to portray himself as a supporter of the people, refugees, and he's blaming the United States and also Poland to start this migration process in the Middle East, because Poland was supporting the United States during the operation in Iraq. So he's using this narrative for his own purpose to support this the negative image of the Western countries, among them Poland. So this is one of the main goals of the Lukashenko, and also increase anti-immigration sentiments among Europeans. This is the second goal as well, to support this pressure to the society. And also destabilize the border. I mean, to find the weaknesses, and also he wants to finally to be recognized by the European countries as a not maybe democratic leader, but he wants to portray himself, and he wants to be recognized by the European Union, his regime, and lifting the sanctions. So this is only also the goal of the Lukashenko. So this is the main the reason why he is trying to push the migration and immigrants from his country. And what are essentially the perspective of this policy? So first of all, I'm afraid, I mean, there will be the best scenario, but in the long term, the pressure of the Polish and Baltic border will still continue, because even now Lukashenko is trying to bring some new people from other countries, and because Belarus so far is facing the same problem as Poland with demography, so they lost 1 million people in the last decades, and they are now negotiating with the Pakistan to bring people from this country to Belarus. Also, they are facing economical problem, because Belarus was one of the major producer of the potatoes, and now they don't have potatoes because all the potatoes are going to Russia. So they are also facing this kind of problem with the economy, like with the people, because many people escape to Western countries, and he's trying to fill this gap. So I think that in the long term there will be still pressure of the Belarus on the Polish soil, and this will be afraid the most is also the drone attacks, because we faced quite recently the first attempt to protect our attempt to conduct by the Belarusian regime, and the problem is that we are pretty late. We don't have, we cannot destroy the drones with the super jets because they are too expensive. We need a new system. And moreover, the worst is actually they will use the so-called drone swarms. I mean, there will be, if there will be like, for example, few drones, will be, this is much easier. But what if you have 100? And they are not too much expensive for Russia and Ukraine, because it costs like 400 euro. But what they are producing a lot. So what if they will stand like 1,000? So few of them can touch Polish soil, and it will be tragedy. We are still lucky not to have any casualties, but it is really pretty dangerous for us to see such a scenario. And no one actually was trying to create such a system who will protect this space and against this kind of attacks. Turkey has some capacity to protect the soil, but they didn't face also such attacks with, like nowadays Ukrainians are facing the same problem almost every day with attack of the drones. So this is a big question mark, how to protect the space and how to protect against these drones. Also, the next issue that we are facing so far is the operation on the Polish infrastructure, critical infrastructure. We already faced there were some attempts to destroy on the Rhineway in Poland. So there was we are facing this issue, and actually we don't know that might be a big problem for Poland to protect this infrastructure. And finally, we came to the conclusion and to recommendation. What we can do next in terms of the protection and increase security in Poland and on the border. First is to enforce the border. I mean, we already have a new program that is trying to protect our territory. It is like this Eastern Shield established by this government, and they are trying to enforce the border because they're afraid in case of the aggression that might be some tanks who will try to cross the territory. And also Belarus and Russia is organizing a lot of operation to only close the Polish border, and it created a threat, and essentially the Polish government decided to build this fortification. So there are some solutions, but we still try to find some of the programs to protect our space. So this is like still on the way, and so the goal is to improve this drone system. And second issue is like also to fight with Russian propaganda. Quite recently, it seems like after some of the problem with corruption in Ukraine, nowadays it seems like the Russia don't need too much interfere in the media in Poland, because unfortunately some of people start to portray Ukraine to be the fight the corruption, start scandal began to use this as a tool to promote this anti-Ukrainian sentiments. And I think the major role in the process is playing the digitalization of the social media, because now people are not watching especially the news, they are watching the short videos, and because of the algorithm, you can have more this kind of stories about the corruption, and in fact this creates kind of image that Ukrainians is spending this money in different ways. So Poland will give money to Ukraine, and Ukraine some of the politicians will steal this money and run away. So it also create a bad image about this policy. So actually Russia so far don't need too much to interfere in Polish media. Even there are some restrictions to Sputnik and other media, Russia Today, but this is still the problem to how we can promote this support for Ukraine, because it has so far is going down to among the society to support Ukraine. The next issue, we have to develop our technical, especially know-how. Not only know-how, but especially improve our equipment. We are late, as I mentioned before, and we can also take an example of Turkey, because Turkey is like one of the leaders in terms of the technology, and they have their own PR, of course, the drones, who are playing a very crucial role in the wars. But they started to develop this very late, when the United States implemented sanctions in 1974. They started to develop their own technology. But so far Poland is starting to think how to develop. So it is a big crucial question how we can at least try to go faster with this process. And finally, I think recommendation might be the most important one, to still support Ukraine, because it is the interest of Poland and generally the Baltic states. Because for us, supporting Ukraine is, I will repeat some of the sentences of our leaders in the past, Piłsudski or Giedroyć, who mentioned that there is not free Poland without free Ukraine. And these words are still very, might be also implemented in our foreign vectors of the foreign policy, because we prefer to have Ukraine, even with the democratic progress, with the corruption that we hope they will sort out in the future. But better to have such a Ukraine than to have the second Belarus, who will threaten us and to destabilize the region. So our goal should be to support Ukraine, because Ukraine is the only country who can, without Ukraine we cannot stop the imperialism from Russia. So that might be a very crucial rule and our main goal, because Russia, so far, I think will not stop, even if we take a look back what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So all the conflicts that Russia was trying to conduct, interior and external, they didn't have any break. The war became part of the vectors of the foreign policy from Russia, and we are afraid that that will not stop in Ukraine, because they want to take, we don't believe, or I mean I don't believe that there will be a peace process will have to solve the problem, that they will go forward. So we need free Ukraine and support Ukraine as much as possible, and to promote this idea in Polish society. So thank you very much.